Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for a Tuesday, May the 10th, 2022. Before we get into the body of the show, something amusing happened to me today, or at least I thought it was amusing. That I was walking up to my room from the lobby, and I passed a man on the stairs, a white fellow. I'd say he's probably about 4 years old. He's wearing a baseball cap, balding at the temples, and he had a very heavy sweatshirt on with a hoodie. And there was a picture of a man with a shaved head and the legend underneath, Tupac Shakur. He was wearing a mask. Boy, nothing says thug life like wearing a mask. Eh? Hmm? Let's talk about democracy. Boy, there's a lot of concern about democracy out there. And, when you hear leftist progressives talk about how democracy needs to be defended, something wicked this way comes. They have a stitch up in mind because democracy means to them we always win. And so called misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech are facts and opinions that disturb the leftist hegemony. That's all that it is. Apparently, there's too many people speaking who shouldn't be speaking. The wrong kinds of people are raising their voices. And this has to do with Trump and COVID-19 and the Ukraine and climate change, everything. It's pretty much all one issue. There is the narrative, and then there is evil. At least that's the way the left sees it. There's a column by William Briggs, statistician to the stars, and I should mention his book, Everything You Believe is Wrong. Before we get into this, he begins, it is interesting to note that if I'd kept my original headline, attempting to make global warming skepticism illegal, it would have caused heads to scratch inside of turn. Propaganda works. All right. 2 new and 2 successful power grabs by the regime were completed last week. The first was the start of the Disinformation Governance Board under the Department of Homeland Security. This creates a mechanism to define official thought crimes. I repeat, if official disinformation exists, there necessarily must exist official truths, which are only coincidental with actual truths, and therefore there must exist an entity in charge of creating and regulating them. The second grab was creation of the Office of Environmental Justice under the Department of Justice. There is no such thing as environmental justice, but such a fiction can be defined with respect to the science, as in listen to the science. Science is research provided by experts, and experts, you recall, are educated, credentialed, important individuals who align with and are supported by the regime directly or indirectly. The first thing you will have noticed is that all things must now be named for what they are not. That is the well-known nature of advertising. The second obvious observation is that these new agencies are two specific aspects of the same thing: official control of information. Briggs continues, the DGB will be the clearinghouse for official truths, as discussed, and the OEJ will be, among other things, one of its police forces for certain kinds of non-political thought crimes. The right kind of police force, too. Armed men, the government trusts and loves guns when they are in the hands of official agents, equipped with armored SWAT vehicles, are not necessary for thought law arrests. Lawsuits are far superior, which is to say the power to legally steal money of those whose thoughts are officially classed as disinformation. Like the DGB, the OEJ has been in the works for some time. Here's a Briggs headline from January. Can you be sued for climate disinformation? New white paper on legal liability for climate denial. Quote, the Climate Social Science Network recently published a report on greenwashing litigation, a landscape analysis of how climate disinformation is being challenged in courts based on a database of climate laws and another of climate litigation. First, let's lay out what's meant by greenwashing and its more specific climate washing variant, referring to how companies use rhetoric to conceal their pollution in climate-friendly terms. Greenwashing, per the report and the many studies it cites, consists of unsubstantiated or misleading claims regarding an actor's environmental performance, including selective discourse of good news but not bad, while climate washing may encompass issues that go beyond the natural environment, unquote. There is in the legal white paper not even a hint of a shadow of a notion of a dream, of the mere wisp of an idea that climate doom could be false or over certain. Climate doom will happen unless bad thoughts like greenwashing are vanquished. They sternly warn company lawyers to avoid disinformation regarding climate change and action, and they tell would-be suers existing soft and hard law can be the basis of litigation. Such will be provided by the OEJ. OT lists are being made. The White House gathered experts to ritually condemn climate delayism and to provide the government the ability to say experts created the OT list, not us. Other experts took to Nature in the peer-reviewed paper Computer Assisted Classification of Contrarian Claims About Climate Change to show that computers can spot wrongthink. A growing body of scholarship investigates the role of misinformation in shaping the debate on climate change. The abstract opens growing body. Experts can always be counted on to provide the regime what it needs. Briggs continues, they warn that contrarian thought increasingly has challenged climate policy and renewable energy, and that organized climate change contrarianism has played a significant role in the spread of misinformation and the delay of meaningful action to mitigate climate change. This paper is proof of our contention that in order for there to be official disinformation, there must be lists of OTs. That is the only way a computer can identify misinformation. Because all models only say what they are told to say, their computer model must have been told what constitutes wrongthink. OTs exist, certified by experts, and will be used to control and police thought. The focus will be more than on global warming, of course, but given the waning of corona doom, the regime needs a juicy crisis to focus on. We must, said Janet, inflation is transitory, Yellen, decarbonize our economy. It is because of the vast sums involved in this decarbonization, which is to say of transferring the wealth from those on the outside to those on the inside, that the DGB and the OEJ will flourish. This is unprecedented hubris, certainly outside of wartime, for the government to say, we own the truth and we intend to police it. But get ready for more of this and, well, much more of this. Rebecca Falconer at Axios has this, misinformation spurring U.S. life expectancy erosion, FDA chief says. Yes, really. U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Robert Califf told CNN Saturday evening that almost no one in the U.S. should be dying from COVID-19, but misinformation was impacting the death toll by the numbers. Nearly 998,000 people have died of COVID in the U.S. since the pandemic began. As of Sunday night, according to data from Johns Hopkins University, the coronavirus was the third leading cause of death in the U.S. in 2021 for the second consecutive year, behind heart disease and cancer. What he's saying, thank you for the condescension, Axios. Califf acknowledged to CNN's Pamela Brow that there is no way to quantify his belief that misinformation is the leading cause of death in the U.S., but pointed to an erosion of life expectancy that's on average 5 years shorter than other high-income countries. That might have something to do with other conditions, say the fatness of Americans. They're all based on estimates, but this is quite disturbing, Califf said. With COVID, the situation is we know that if you're vaccinated and up to date with your vaccinations, you have 90% reduction in the risk of death, he said. If you were unlucky enough to get infected, another 90% reduction would be antivirals, which are now available. The bottom line, again, thank you for the condescension, Axios. Almost no one in this country should be dying from COVID if we were up to date on our vaccinations and got appropriate antiviral treatment, Califf said. Worth noting, Califf, a cardiologist by training, told Brow that what's concerned him for a long time since before the pandemic was the reduction of life expectancy from common diseases like heart disease, for which a lot of information was available on preventing bad outcomes. But somehow the reliable, truthful messages are not getting across, he said. And it's being washed down by a lot of misinformation, which is leading people to make bad choices that are unfortunate for their health. Well, how about the media, the elite, talking up fat proudness, fit at any weight? And let's see some morbidly obese woman who is, I don't know, 5'3" tall and 250 pounds, and she is just so healthy. How about Lizzo? Everyone loves Lizzo, right? The big picture. Again, thanks, Axios. He believed that Caliph said that misinformation is our leading cause of death in the U.S. Okay. Oh, a third of Americans who believe coronavirus vaccine misinformation are aware they're in disagreement with scientists and medical experts, according to a survey by the COVID States Project earlier this year. Yeah, how are the vaccines looking? How are the boosters looking? Negative efficacy? Anyone? Amazing, amazing stuff. What's most amazing is not that he said this, but that he wasn't shouted down and driven from a polite society. My own country of Canada, well, the fix is in. The fix is in. Free speech, such as it exists in my country, is going to be abolished, and abolished soon. And don't expect much opposition from the official opposition, the Conservative Party of Canada. This is an essay in National Opinion Center, which is a quasi-official government organ. And it is by Beverly McLaughlin, who's the former Chief Justice of the Canadian Supreme Court, and Taylor Owen, Director of Center for Media Technology and Democracy at McGill. And they are the co-chairs of the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression. They're very worried about democracy. They begin, there is little doubt remaining among experts, policymakers, and the public that the ways in which our digital infrastructure are designed and incentivized have had widespread social, economic, and political costs. Despite years of assurances from big tech and wishful thinking from governments, the market has proven unwilling or unable to self-regulate. And so democratic governments around the world are finally stepping up. Oh, okay. So widespread social, economic, and political costs. What are they? And why must government do something? I'm not really seeing that argument being made in this piece. It's just assumed. The largest, most vexing piece of this policy agenda is what to do about harmful content online. And what constitutes harmful content online, Beverly McLaughlin and Taylor Owen. This is in part because it sits squarely at the intersection of two largest challenges of our platform-based internet: the truly massive scale of the content posted online, hundreds of billions of pieces of content a day, and the financial incentives for the distribution of this content being calibrated for virality, engagement, and speed rather than the public good. And again, who defines what the public good is? Because in my country of Canada, apparently the sexual mutilation of children is part of the public good. Also, threatening imprisonment to anyone, even parents who counsel children against this. That's what counts as the public good in Canada. But our experts continue, but it is also because ensuring online safety. Again, what constitutes online safety? Also touches on the core democratic right of free expression. Yes, whenever Canadians talk about the core democratic right of free expression, what they mean is that they intend to end it. Democratic governments around the world define and regulate speech differently, so there is no global set of rules for platforms to follow. This will be determined country by country. In the Canadian context, the Charter provides robust protection for free speech, while recognizing that governments can limit speech to prevent harms, provided the limits are reasonable and justified in a free and democratic society, meaning there is no effective protection for free speech in Canada. What does it mean? It means whatever the Supreme Court of Canada decides that it means, and the Supreme Court of Canada decided some years ago that truth is not a defense to the accusation of so-called hate speech. They continue, there are two emerging methods of regulating online safety. The first approach, most notably implemented by Germany, addresses harmful content once it has already been posted. Platform companies are given 24 hours to remove content that is flagged as being illegal or be subject to fines of up to 50 million euros. The problem is that the fines are so large and the task so opaque that this approach can risk over censorship. This was the model initially proposed by the Canadian government last summer and which was widely critiqued, including by us. The EU and the UK have developed an alternate approach that focuses not on the individual pieces of bad content, but on the system and incentives that lead to it being created and spread. Instead of tackling the bad things downstream, they look upstream to the design of the system as a whole. This approach focuses on the level of risk that is currently allowed to exist within the digital ecosystem. When a platform develops a new product, say a change to their feed algorithm or a video sharing tool targeted at teens, there is no requirement to take potential harm into account. Again, what is this potential harm? They can optimize their products for profit with no requirements to factor in risk posed to the safety of their users. What could such an upstream, risk-based approach toward online safety look like in Canada? First, the system must be made radically transparent. Platforms must also be accountable for how they build their products. To do so, we should draw on a concept already in use in Canadian law, that of the statutory duty to act responsibly, and who defines what constitutes responsible behavior. Third, it is critical to shift the balance between platforms and their users. We can do so through mandated interoperability and data portability, a serious national civic education and digital literacy initiative, government propaganda, and critically, significantly strengthened and long overdue data privacy protection. The two experts conclude this approach is not about responding or reacting to content or speech, but about assessing the level of risk and implementing product safety standards so that platforms are being subject to the same statutory duty to act responsibly as other consuming-facing products are. Oh, okay. So let's say some food or cleanser is produced by a company which poisons people. Yes, okay, I think everyone can understand that. If someone says to Beverly McLaughlin on Twitter, "You suck," is that online harm? And how should it be treated? Oh, it's not about responding or reacting to content or speech. Yes, it is. They're lying to you. For too long, the issue of online harms has been erroneously framed as one of individual bad actors in the regulation of speech, but the problem is one of systemic risk. You see, let's just come up with terms like, systemic risk and mandated interoperability. And you see, we're not taking your rights away. No, 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 no. It's all about systems. Yes, Canada now has a chance to learn from and build on the policies attempted in other countries and get it right. This is from Michel Carbert at the Globe and Mail. The federal government's broad push to regulate the internet has the support of a majority of Canadians, according to a new survey, even though the details of Ottawa's plans are generating strong pushback from policy experts. Oh, so Canadian public are saying that they approve something and they don't know what it is. The House of Commons is currently studying two separate pieces of legislation proposing the regulation of online news remuneration and streaming services. It is also in the process of drafting a third bill that will aim to combat various online abuses, including hate speech, terrorist content, and child pornography. A Nanos research poll commissioned by the Globe and Mail found that 55% of Canadians support or somewhat support greater government regulation of the internet, while 37% oppose or somewhat oppose such regulation, and 8% said they are unsure. Chief data scientist Nick Dano says, I would say that it's a cautious green light. That's not what it is. It's manufacturing consent. There has been no serious debate about the problem, about the question of restricting free speech and how free speech should be restricted. No, there hasn't been one. So in the absence of this poll is absolutely useless, except, of course, in manufacturing consent. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Jokerkin 666. Hello to Podcast 88, Enron, William Hicks. Yo Mama says, I found a way back onto Twitter. Rejoice. Hello to John Nance. No, it wasn't an N95 mask. Showing it to the man, one mask at a time, says Dan. Hello to Brian Frakes. Hello to Professor Paul. Как вы поживаете? John Vance says the World Health Organization is going to take away countries' sovereignty in dealing with the health crisis. The vote is on May the 22nd. Jim Smith said, didn't the Firesign Theatre issue an album in the early 70s called Everything You Know Is Wrong? I used to hear them on FM radio. I don't know all that much about them. Didn't they have an album called We're All Bozos on This Bus? William Hicks says, it's interesting you said they always win. Told someone the other day that the Democrats have gotten everything they ever wanted over my lifetime, and it's not enough. They must have it all. And Brian Frakes salutes what he describes as Professor Paul's excellent live streams on the Germans of Russia. Yes, and Don't Touch That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers, was a formative influence on me as a teeny bopper, says Visionary Companion. That's the Firesign Theatre again. John Vance says, I know Ukraine is winning the war because pundits on YouTube make fun of Russian military parades and Ukrainian planes shooting at trees. Hello to the Selfish Meme. It's a new name to me. Has China taken over Taiwan? Says says John Vance, or asks. No, not that I'm aware of. Jokin666 says, watch some Derek Jensen videos on the subversion of the environmental movement. Hello to Tom Anderson. People started wearing masks again. What did I miss? Lots of people are wearing masks, even outdoors, at least where I live. Of course, Trudeau wears them, except when he's out of the country, or actually has to talk to people so that he can be understood. KMG, are you old Mr. Grace or young Mr. Grace? Asked Yo Mama. I'm old. I'm certainly old. There's never, well, I haven't been in a situation in my family with, children having their same names as their fathers say. So then you get old Mr. and young Mr. The Selfish Meme says Fauci is prepared to do everything to fight COVID. Really? What about fighting obesity? What about promoting exercise, early detection, early treatment? Nope. Hang on, what was that? Back out those with multiple comorbidities, false positive PCR tests, remdesivir deaths, single jab COVID patients, or double jab beyond 6 months unvaxxed. The actual COVID death count is less. Yes, it is. And Dr. Bonnie, who is the chief latrine walla of my province of British Columbia, announced a few weeks ago that they are going to be overcounting COVID deaths, not that there are many in British Columbia, and then moving the count down afterwards. Maximum panic. Gamian, hello, says, I'm banned from Facebook for 29 days. Book club suggestion, Johnny the Walrus by David Wright. I was talking about that last week, I think. Hello to Pete Bauman. Watch 200 Mules. Golly, I got to be careful. I could be banned even for mentioning that title. How about if I call it 2,000 Miles? Hello to the cell. And what are the three sanest countries? Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I could make a calculation off the top of my head. Okay. And more on the same story. Oh, yes. So the two experts, including Beverly McLaughlin, former Chief Justice of the Canadian Supreme Court, says that Canada should follow the British model. Is that really a good idea? I don't think that it is. I do not think that it is. And we have a piece from Spiked about this. When this bill was introduced, there was shock. There was shock in Britain because this bill goes so far. This is a piece by Fraser Myers. This is the end of free speech online. The UK's online safety bill is an authoritarian nightmare. The internet has changed radically in the past decade or so, where social media giants once boasted about being the free speech wing of the free speech party. In recent years, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms have become increasingly censorious, cracking down on dissenting views and offensive speech. Big tech has relished this role as the unofficial arbiter of acceptable thought. But while the likes of Facebook may have severely wounded free speech online, it could be the UK government that deals the killer blow. The Online Safety Bill aims to make the UK the safest place to be online in the world. Yeah, safe? How? In other words, the country with the most strictly regulated and censored internet of any liberal democracy. This mammoth piece of legislation was 5 years in the making, and those 5 years show. The bill is vast in scope and terrifying in its implications for free speech. Most significant is the so called duty of care the bill imposes on social media firms. Tech platforms will be legally required to prevent users from seeing both illegal content and so called legal but harmful content. What actually constitutes harmful content has yet to be revealed. If the Online Harms White Paper, published in 2020, is any guide, then this is likely to include content which might call psychological harm, disinformation, or trolling and harassment. Of course, all of these harms are subjective. Trolling can extend from playful banter to persistent harassment. Which views tech firms consider to be disinformation has less to do with lies and truth than political expediency. Once this list of harms is approved by Parliament, the Culture Secretary will have the power to add more categories of harm, and firms will be required to report new emerging harms to Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator. So we should expect the bill's censorious remit to expand over time. Firms which fail to comply with the new duty of care requirements or are obstructive or provide false information to Ofcom can be fined up to 10% of their annual worldwide revenue, and platform executives can be sentenced to up to 2 years in jail. These severe penalties have allowed UK Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries to claim that she is taking on big tech and that she is holding Silicon Valley firms accountable. But it is not big tech firms that suffer when free speech is curtailed online. Indeed, they have already demonstrated their indifference to free speech. Fraser Myers continues, after all, it is not Facebook, Twitter, or Google that produce the harmful content the government wants to eliminate. It is us, the users of social media, the deplorable, unruly citizens who are saying things that our political masters would rather we did not say. It is our ability to express ourselves that will be curtailed by this legislation, not theirs. And this is why the bill is so troubling. As if big tech were not censorious enough, the Online Safety Bill adds a further commercial incentive to censor. Firms are not going to risk fines to protect the free expression of Gary from Sidcup or Jemima from Penge. The bill means that platforms, when confronted with content that might possibly edge somewhere near the threshold of harmful, will censor it first and ask questions later. A similar law in Germany, encouraging big tech to censor more proactively, ended up censoring one of the government ministers who pushed for the legislation. Yet despite this, with astonishing chutzpah, Dorries has even tried to present her new regime of digital censorship as a victory for free speech. Facebook and others will no longer be able to arbitrarily silence users with the click of a mouse without explanation or access to appeal, she wrote in the Telegraph this week. Is that how it works, with a click of a mouse? Do they have thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people looking at everything that's published on Facebook and decide to censor it with a click of a mouse? I believe they use these things called algorithms. That's because the bill will allow the government to find what is harmful rather than big tech. But that does not stop this from being censorship. Besides, the responsibility still lies with big tech to enact the censorship, and the bill could hardly be more clear that the way for platforms to deal with harmful content is to censor it. This is state censorship outsourced to a private company. Dorries also points to the fact that the bill contains provisions for users to appeal a platform's decision to remove their content. This assumes that there will be a large gap between what big tech wants to censor and what the government wants to censor. There have been suggestions that the UK government might be more generous towards so-called gender-critical beliefs than Silicon Valley, but it hardly negates the fact that the government is set to introduce new swaths of new rules. And all of these problems discussed so far concern just one aspect of this gigantic bill. In fact, hardly anything escapes its remit. As the online safety bill has evolved over the years, new elements have crept in, seemingly in response to every tragedy or scandal that made the news. As Sky News points out, it is a bill that seeks to prevent everything from knife crime to eating disorders to anonymous trolling to scammers all at once, simply because these things might be connected to the internet. Fraser Myers concludes, but while the bill itself might be confused, its consequences are all too clear. The online safety bill means the end of the free internet as we know it. Free speech online could become a relic of the past. In some good news, this is from Jessica Berstinsky at CNBC. Elon Musk said Tuesday he would reverse Twitter's ban on former President Donald Trump if his acquisition goes through. Permanent ban should be extremely rare and really reserved for accounts that are bots or spam accounts. I do not think it was correct to ban Donald Trump. Musk said at FT Live's Future of the Car conference, I think that it was a mistake because it alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. I would reverse the permanent ban, added Musk. I don't own Twitter yet, so this is not like a thing that will definitely happen because what if I don't own Twitter? It is difficult to, it's difficult to look at American politics without concluding that it has become as crazy as those of my own country. There are so many stories coming from the Biden administration. They just opened the borders. So what do you do with these people? You put them on planes and you fly them to Maine and other places. So they'll be invisible. They're all breaking the law. They're all phony refugees, but never mind that. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post Millennial. Attorney General Merrick Garland has ruled that judges considering asylum cases can take into consideration the mental health of criminals attempting to come into the country. Oh, so apparently America doesn't have enough crazy people and it has to import them from abroad. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, illegal immigrants seeking entry into the country would have been made ineligible for both asylum and withholding of removal if they have been convicted of a particularly serious crime and pose a danger to the community of the United States. So how I understand this is you have committed a particularly dangerous crime, you say, but this person is neurodivergent, so this person gets to stay. Yeah. Incredible. In a specific case, the man attempting to seek a withholding of removal, with the memo stating that the man said if he returned to Mexico, he would persecute it on the basis of his sexual orientation and mental health condition. Ooh, let's just not bring criminals. Let's bring criminal homosexuals and criminal troons to the United States. What could go wrong? And, let's just a little rundown of Puddinghead Biden, the putative president of the United States of America. This is from Dave Boyer at the Washington Times. President Biden Tuesday blamed Russia's war in Ukraine, corporate greed, the pandemic, and the policies of ultra-MAGA Republicans for causing record high inflation, and insisted that Democrats' big spending didn't spur the highest price increases in 40 years. I'm surprised he didn't mention sunspots. It's not because of the spending, Biden told reporters at the White House. I think our policies help, not hurt. In a speech aimed at voters' frustration in the midterm election year, Biden said his administration is tackling inflation on several fronts without cooperation from the GOP. The president said he needs to do a better job communicating with voters who are not focused on the reasons for high gas prices and consumer goods. You see, they're stupid. They don't understand what's going on. What I have to do is explain in simple, straightforward language what's going on, Biden said, but right now it's confusing. There is a war in Ukraine. I'm not suggesting the American people can't understand it. Well, you are, actually. They're working 8 to 10 hours a day just to put food on the table. Inflation hit 8.5% in March, and the nationwide average gas price reached a new record on Tuesday of $4.37 per gallon. Yes, ultra MAGA Republicans, who are the most extreme force in American history, according to Biden. And more gibberish from Biden. This is from Tampa Free Press. Laurel Duggan. Joe Biden said, I agree with what Federal Reserve Board Chairman Powell said last week, that the number one threat is the strength, and that strength that we've built is inflation. So the Fed should do its job, and it will do the job, I'm convinced, with that in mind. Biden grew more articulate as he continued through his remarks. Okay, all right. Inflation is the strength. And here's another one. This is from Timothy Harazzi at Fox News. President Biden made an odd remark during his speech at the White House's Cinco de Mayo event on Thursday as he talked about students in the U.S. learning Spanish. Quote, 25 out of every 100 children in grades kindergarten through senior in high school speak Spanish. 25 out of every 100. It's overwhelming the interest of not only those kids, but of all Americans that we invest in the community and will conquer and honor and lift up those folks who are, in fact, have gotten in the way. Every time I see one of these, crazy quilt paragraphs from Joe Biden, I always expect the paragraph to end, and then President Biden angrily demanded a pudding cup. And, oh, yes, apparently America is a very racist country. And it is a very anti-alphabet people, and it is misogynist, which explains why a Black Haitian immigrant lesbian is now the press secretary for the President of the United States. This is a strange thing, adnamerica.com. Johannes Schmidt. When Karine Jean-Pierre replaces Jen Psaki is the Biden administration's newest press secretary, she will make history by blah, blah, blah. But the 47-year-old Columbia grad has made a name for herself in Washington by calling out what she perceives as racism in America and priding herself in being everything that Donald Trump hates. In a 2019 interview with PBS's Bonnie Herbe, Jean-Pierre said, I just think that America has a really big problem with race, and it's very real, and we've yet to deal with it. Oh, so everything that's happened since Brown versus Board of Education, that counts for nothing. It's never enough. After former President Donald Trump won the presidential election in 2016, the incoming press secretary spoke about the political implications of the GOP's victory in her memoirs and subsequent book tour. Memoirs? What has this woman ever done to deserve memoirs? Quote, I always say, if you're not white, male, straight, or wealthy, you're under attack. I mean, there is a target on your back, unquote. I'm everything that Donald Trump hates. I'm a Black woman. I am gay. I am a mom. Both my parents were born in Haiti, and they came here for the American dream. Later, after the former president referred to Haiti and a group of developing nations as shithole countries, Jean-Pierre urged her platform while giving a speech at the University of Michigan to say she was tired of his immigrant bashing and homophobia. Immigrant bashing. Oh, yeah. So this woman comes from one of the, well, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. The worst country in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti. And she comes to America and lets everyone know that she hates America, that America is just so homophobic and misogynist and the like, that she becomes press secretary to the president of the United States. You would think she might show a little gratitude, but that's not how it works. This is from Jackson Richmond at Mediaite. Incoming White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has come under fire for a tweet falsely saying that the 2018 gubernatorial election in Georgia was stolen. Quote, this is April the 2nd, 2020. This is from Karine Jean-Pierre. Reminder, Brian Kemp stole the gubernatorial election from Georgians and Stacey Abrams. Yeah. Did Stacey Abrams ever concede defeat in this? Of course, double standards, right? That the Democrats have claimed that the 2000 election was stolen, that the 2004 election was stolen, and that the 2016 election was stolen. But that's okay because history, it bends in an arc or something like that towards justice, some such thing. Molly Hemingway tweeted, if questioning the results of elections were a crime, pretty much the entire Democratic Party, the entire media complex would be in prison. Well, rather than point out these double standards, it would probably be a better thing to just howl at the Republican Party, until they make sure that these shenanigans don't happen again. This is from Kyle Morris at Fox News. Biden disinformation czar Nina Jankowicz's book says she won't be silenced by harassment from men online. She claims the infrastructure of the internet is built for men. Well, it certainly was built by men. In her recent book, How to Be a Woman Online, Nina Jankowicz raises concerns on a number of subjects surrounding the backlash women face online, placing great focus on how men respond to what she has to say. What do they make some sort of remark about her chin? We accept that harassment of women is simply the cost of their social media engagement, or worse, that women are expected to endure harassment and silencing in the name of free speech. It's long past time for that to change. Are women silenced on the internet? That has not been my experience. The relentless stream of online misogyny to which I and millions of other women who deign to engage in public discourse has been a subject that sometimes rattles me. I may have a slightly thicker skin than some ho-ho. But watching thousands of strangers criticize my appearance, experience, and expertise is not easy. Watching them objectify me is not easy. Every person on earth is objectified because we are objects. We are not mere spirit. We are corporeal as well. No one escapes objectification. Nina, expertise my ass. Something amusing from the world of scholarship. This is from Jennifer Schussler at the New York Times. Medieval scholars spar on a modern battlefield. Twitter, an online fracas over a book review, is the latest blow-up in a field that has been roiled in recent years with acrimonious debate over race. That's not exactly true. A bunch of really annoying people have decided to say things like Anglo-Saxon is a racist term. It is? How? How is it racist? Medieval scholar can be a noisy and fractious place where scholars post articles, memes, and not infrequently fierce blasts at each other. But over the past week, things turned hotter than a pot of boiling oil as a dispute over a spiked book review spiraled into a conflagration involving charges and countercharges of racism, bullying, and deception. It started when Mary Rambaran Olm, a literary scholar who focuses on race and early medieval England, accused editors at the Los Angeles Review of Books of torpedoing a strongly negative review she had written of The Bright Ages, A New History of Medieval Europe, because of their friendship with the fellow white scholars. White scholars, don't you just hate them? As the online furor grew, one of the editors posted a fierce rebuttal accusing her of misrepresenting the situation and saying the publication had killed the review because she refused to accept edits. In recent years, groups like Medievalists of Color have sought to diversify the overwhelmingly white field. Scholars have also pushed for a broader conception of the Middle Ages, looking beyond the traditional focus on Western Europe to encompass the Middle East, North Africa, and even China, Japan, and the Americas. Okay. So this woman, Dr. Rambaram Olm, is, wait for it, Canadian. You knew that. You knew that, didn't you? Steve Saylor writes on this, should the study of medieval Europe be banned for its innate whiteness? This is the same whoop-de-doo as is going on with classicists, e.d. e.g. Donna Zuckerberg, except even stupider because the study of Europe's Middle Ages is obviously going to be all about white people, since that's who's lived there then. There are a handful of semi-non-white academics in these fields trying to use fashionable anti-white racist hate to make more money for themselves. So this Rambaram Om character was an ally of Matthew Gabrielli, and they have fallen out because they wrote this book, The Bright Ages, or Gabrielli and David Perry wrote this book, The Bright Ages, and it turns out they are toxically white. The Bright Ages is about how the European Dark Ages were actually cool and the best thing in the world, diverse, but the authors are white, so therefore they are bad. Dr. Rambaram Om uses the text string white 59 times in her lambasting of the book she reviewed, including 19 uses of whiteness. It's almost as if whiteness has become a racist slur. On April the 27th, Dr. Rambaram Om posted what she said was the nearly 3,700-word review as the editors received it with only 4 minor edits. The post, which ran under the headline, Sounds About White, was accompanied by a photo of the book next to a piece of bread decorated with a frowny face drawn in what looked like mayonnaise. Curiously enough, it doesn't look like white bread. Oh, is this acceptable now? Fried chicken, watermelon, etc. Do we want to go down that road? Dr. Rambaram Om, Sailor comments, was attempting to do the usual anti-whiteness ethnic slur of associating white people, in this case medieval Europeans and white scholars of medieval Europe, with white bread and mayonnaise, judging by her picture, though she didn't have any white bread in the house. This woman is supposedly black or part black. No, she is not. What are we coming in there at 23andMe? We're coming in at like 1 or 2% at best. She has bright blue eyes and startlingly straight hair. Her facial features are, they're white, and her skin is, pale, or palish. At one point, 2 scholars of color suggested that Dr. Rambaram Om was not, as she says in her bio, part black. One later deleted the tweets and apologized. In the interview, Dr. Rambaram Om, who described herself as very mixed with parents with Afro-Indian Caribbean roots, called the accusations that she had lied about her race shocking. I was blown away after having the review rejected in the way it was that it descended into this mess. Steve Saylor concludes, judging by her hair and eyes, she has at most 1 drop of black blood, but due to all the discrimination against blacks in our world of white privilege, she's never going to let you forget it. The well-lit picture above is from the Daily Mail, which doesn't work as hard to stay on narrative. Here's her much more dimly lit picture in the NYT. She's apparently done something to her hair since the previous picture. Yes, she appears to be attempting to grow dreadlocks. And Eutypius has considered this. Woke vipers in the academy or the vile Mary Rambaram Om strikes again. The racial agitator and sometimes scholar of medieval English, famous for trying to cancel the term Anglo-Saxon for being racist, turns on a former woke collaborator. Mary Rambaram Om, man, I'm getting tired of saying that, is a provost postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, a scholar of Old English, and a professional brown person. 15 years ago, she was writing boring articles with titles like 2 Remarks Concerning Folio 121 of the Exeter Book and examining Ethelred II's legislative legacy from AD 993 to 1006. But nobody cared what she had to say about those things. After 2015, wokery opened new avenues of endeavor, and with an enormous sigh of relief, she redirected her mediocrity to the towering problem of race in the Middle Ages. Relying heavily on cultural theorist Stuart Hall, as she writes, and post-colonial theorist Dipesh Chakrabarty, I explore both the rich contributions that non-white people made to the culture of early medieval England from the 5th to the 11th century. Yeah, okay. The project not only brings to light archives of race and England that have gone unexplored or ignored, its aim is to contribute to larger conversations about race in the global Middle Ages. Eutypius comments, Before going any further, I have to get this off my chest. There is nothing more daft or incoherent than the idea of the global Middle Ages. The Middle Ages are those centuries which fall between classical antiquity and the Renaissance. These are the things that they are in the middle of, and these bookends exist for Europe alone. All talk of medieval Japan or medieval India is by analogy with the European periodization. Nor were non-white people at all abundant or influential in early medieval England, although peoples and political structures outside of Europe, particularly the Islamic world and Byzantium, naturally played a role in European history. Conversely, Europeans did not contribute very much to classical Indian culture, which is why it would be stupid to complain that histories of the Satavahana Empire unjustly exclude the cultural contributions of Europeans. It feels like another age, but back in 2019, the woke medieval lit crowd were fighting a great battle against so-called white supremacy. Ram Om first came to general notice in this context when she gave a speech at some conference demanding that the International Society of Anglo-Saxonists change their name because of the imaginary racist connotations of the term Anglo-Saxon. In the midst of that absurd fracas, she co-authored with Matthew Gabrielli an article for Time magazine under the title, "The Middle Ages Have Been Misused by the Far Right." Here's why it's so important to get medieval history right. Now, Rambaram Om has decided that it's the relentlessly woke and diversity-addled Gabrielli who is the real racist, setting off a whole new controversy. The woke snake is eating its tail. Well, if you're going to play at the anti-white game, as Gabrielli has done, one can hardly complain that people are going to point to you and say, he's white, look at him, he's white, he's ever so white. Well, come on. You attacked your own people. What did you expect to happen? Maybe he's going to argue that, well, it was only until recently Italians weren't considered white. No, yeah, sorry. No, I've heard that about Italians. I've heard it about the Irish. Not true. In my country, they say things like, oh, in Toronto in the 1950s, there were signs that said, no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. No, there weren't. No, there weren't. Hello to Philip Daniel. Apparently, St. Floyd's family enjoyed his mayonnaise and banana sandwiches, which leads me to believe the mayonnaise slur is pure projection. Yo Mama says, I've heard the term post-classic is a global term for the medieval period. John Saxon did nothing wrong. Donald. John Saxon was a American character actor, dark and intense. Oh yeah, I knew this was coming. Yeah, I was singing it myself. Whoa, Black Betty, ram baram. Whoa, Black Betty, bam, ram baram. Yep, I just couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop it. I thought that the fancy mayonnaise, Dijon mayonnaise, was that's considered acceptable, isn't it, to foodies? I'm quite fond of it myself, although I wouldn't call myself a foodie. How does one grow dreads if you don't have kinky hair? Asked Yo Mama. Well, this was explained to me, or I read this some years ago. White people, like blonde men, deciding that they're going to grow dreads. The secret is to let your hair grow and grow and grow, and to stop washing it entirely. That's the secret. Anwin says, Kevin, in all this craziness in the U.S. and Canada, which side looks like the strong horse and which the weak? Well, okay. Canada is a consensus nation, all right? Which means that we're all supposed to think the same things, basically. Being a consensus nation has advantages and disadvantages. But what the left doesn't understand in Canada is that when things change here, they can change very quickly and very deeply. The United States seems to be split 50-50 or 55-45 or something like that. And, democracy. Yes, the Supreme Court leak, Alito's decision was anti-democratic. No, it was the opposite of that, because it meant that state legislatures, people living in the states, would decide what their abortion laws are, and not 9 unelected judges of the Supreme Court. I despise mayonnaise, says Philip McDaniel. Philip Daniel says, it's not like there were no POC in medieval Europe. It just so happens that most arrived as conquerors: Huns, Avars, Bulgars, Arabs, Berbers, Seljuks, Ottomans, which believes white people had rhetoric. More, Andrea True, Don Willis. That was a disco hit from the 1970s. If I recall my disco history, Andrea True was a porn star. Oh, David the Gnome. That Nina woman has done a fantastic job of sort of hitting the ground running and becoming the most insufferable live in America, as I think KMG stated on Twitter. Well, yes, she seems a fundamentally unserious person. Fundamentally unserious. Also, she is nowhere near as cute as she thinks that she is. Nowhere near as cute. I'm sure she gets a lot of white knighting. Hello, Dionysus. Follow me. What is that, on Twitter? Yeah, sure. I don't do that already. Okay. And now we are going to talk about. Let's look at Jim Kunstler's column from yesterday. And it's called Got the Heebie-Jeebies. Everyone I know is walking around a baseline state of nervous agitation. Are they beset by disinformation? Or is it rather the reality of the cratering nation run by idiots and maniacs? Everywhere you look, calamities gather speed, while the claxons of alarm blare from all compass points. Got money? Looks like soon it will be worthless. Wondering if Putin has had enough of Joe Biden's brainless effrontery to lob some hypersonic big ones in our collective face. Relying on that retirement account you have no direct control over while the financial markets wobble. Need to fill up the gas tank of your pickup truck twice a week? We have some visitors from the Iberian Peninsula next door, and they like to sing in their native language, which they're doing now. Can't find a new condenser to fix the failing fridge, entertaining rumors of looming famine, credit cards maxed out, sheriff stapling an eviction notice on your door, beloved younger brother declaring that henceforth they are your sister, hearing that all those vaxxers and boosters you obediently submitted to might rearrange your DNA. These are just a few of the concerns zinging through the zeitgeist these late days of the Republic. You're correct to be anxious about them, so at least don't worry about worrying. Just understand that the more events spool out in the direction of danger, the more you will be warned against disinformation. The good part is now we know the identity of at least one person who was officially in charge of that. Disinformation expert Nina Jankowicz, or Nijank, new chief of Washington's Disinformation Governance Board. Whose idea was that, by the way? Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, or Almay, didn't seem to know anything pertaining to disinformation last week when grilled in committee by Senator Rand Paul, including two of the most notorious cases in recent memory. Did the Steele dossier include Russian disinformation? Almay says he was not equipped to answer that question. Ditto the question, now definitively settled, as to whether Hunter Biden's laptop stuffed with grifting memoranda was for real. Of course, both of those matters were labeled previously as disinformation by his new expert hire, Nijank, who it appears is similarly unequipped to discuss the particulars at issue. But all this does raise the parallel issue: how much depraved insolence is the public supposed to tolerate from its public servants? My guess, we're nearing the end of America's Christian patience for being snookered, gaslit, lied to, bamboozled, and mind raped, especially as our nation gets gang raped by the party of chaos. Perhaps the solution is to go a little further down the Roe v. Wade path and make abortion fully retroactive, a new and innovative way to cancel lives whose obnoxious presence in the world is a menace to the human project. Declare the likes of Almay and Nijank retroactively unborn, erasing their privilege to appointed office. Meanwhile, several Supreme Court justices are under siege in the direct contravention of 18 U.S. Code 115, influencing, impeding, or retaliating against a federal official by threatening or injuring a family member. The authorities are permitting angry mobs to moil freely outside the justices' houses, while many January 6th so-called insurrectionists rot in the D.C. jail into a second year on misdemeanor charges that the authorities refuse to adjudicate, meaning that there is no authority in Washington, D.C., only a nameless, lawless simulacrum of it conceived, say, in the spirit of Franz Kafka. I'm familiar with this term, habeas corpus, produce the body. How can the government keep these people in prison on a misdemeanor charge for over a year, almost a year and a half now, without prosecuting them? Hope abides that the November elections might set up a correction to much of this madness. The release Saturday of Dinesh D'Souza's documentary, which I'm going to call 2,000 Miles, does not provide a whole lot of encouragement about that. First, of course, before the scheduled midterm elections, there are roughly 6 months of nice weather to get through, meaning conditions that are favorable for action in the street, starring the shock troops of progressive wokery. Depending on where you live, maybe that's another reason to feel those old heebie-jeebies creeping in on little spiders' feet. Yeah, see, it's okay if they do it, you know. Of course, the assumption is that we're never going to fight back. You heard of this fellow called Steve Schmidt? Apparently, he's a political genius. Well, if you ask him, he'll tell you so. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. Stephen Edward Schmidt, born September 1970, is an American communications and public affairs strategist who worked on Republican political campaigns, including those of President George W. Bush, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Arizona Senator John McCain. And he declared himself an independent, left the Republican Party because Trump was involved in the creation of something called, what's been jokingly called, the North American Man-Boy Lincoln Association. Again, according to Wiki, the Lincoln Project is an American political action committee formed in late 2019 by former and incumbent Republicans. During the 2020 presidential election, it aimed to prevent the re-election of Donald Trump and defeat all Republicans in close races running for re-election in the United States Senate. In April 2020, the committee announced its endorsement of Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. So who was involved in this? Creeps all the way down. George Conway, Steve Schmidt, John Weaver, what will we call him? A pederast? An aggressive pederast? Rick Wilson. Molly Jong Fast. Jennifer Horn. Oh, Major Tom Nichols. And Stu Stevens. Just creep after creep after creep. Well, one of these creeps, he was interested in boys, twinks, and he went after them pretty aggressively at the Lincoln Project. And there's a question of when it was known about his activities. And a whole bunch of people left the Lincoln Project because of this. Of course, come on, neoconservatives, establishment, republicanism, conservatism, Inc. is just rife with pederasts. Everyone knows this. In January 2021, responding to a magazine article accusing him of sexual misconduct spanning a period of years, co-founder John Weaver acknowledged having sent inappropriate sexual messages to multiple men, for which he apologized. According to the New York Times, Weaver offered young men professional support in exchange for sex. The report also accused him of cultivating a non-sexual online relationship with a 14-year-old boy and then engaging in sexual banter with him after his 18th birthday. Following the revelations, the Lincoln Project said John's statement speaks for itself. It later issued a follow-up statement describing him as a predator, a liar, and abuser, and denouncing his deplorable and predatory conduct. So they decided they had to get a woman in there. And, who are the people who contributed? Big money. David Geffen. Wow, he's pretty right-wing. Silicon Valley investors Ron Conway, Michael Moritz, and Chris Sacca. Walmart heiress and philanthropist Christy Walton. Continental Cablevision CEO Amos Hofstadter Jr. So it's been alleged that this woman, Horn, an unsuccessful Republican politician in the state of New Hampshire, which of course she did not grow up in New Hampshire. She grew up in New York State. And apparently the accusation is made that she attempted to strong arm the Lincoln Project for big money, big money. And they told her to go pound sand, and she left the organization. The reason I bring this all up is that a few days ago, Meghan McCain, hey, did you know that her late father was John McCain? Yeah, I know. I was blown away by this too. Meghan McCain, the daughter of John McCain? I mean, she never mentions it. She liked a tweet. She liked a tweet in which someone had referred to Steve Schmidt working for a pedophile organization, and Steve Schmidt exploded. This is one of the most joyous berserk meltdowns that I have ever seen. Steve Schmidt has a Substack called The Warning. Ooh, sounds ominous. No books, no money, just the truth. This is a story about lying, public lying. It's a story about Senator John McCain's lying and the damage it has done to many people, including me. There's also a story about my lying, because ultimately John McCain's lie became mine. Over time, that lie has become heavier as I've been abused by the family of the man I worked for as a volunteer. Well, you didn't get paid for running John McCain's campaign? He didn't? He really didn't get paid? The burden of carrying this lie while being attacked for 14 consecutive years by the bully Meghan McCain has finally reached its end for me. You know, if you find yourself being successfully bullied by Meghan McCain, it's time to hang it up. This lie is Senator John McCain's lie. It's his family's burden to carry, not mine. This eventually he was tweeting for something like 36 hours straight. It just one after another, and he pretty much gathered them all together and made them into an essay. So then he talks about Paul Manafort, John McCain turning a blind eye to his dealings of his top advisor, Rick Davis. Apparently they were making money out of the Ukraine. Golly, it is bipartisan. Of course, everybody knows that. So there's some story in the New York Times from 2008 where Schmidt says, I got it wrong. I'd like to apologize to 4 journalists. Immediately following the story's publication, John and Cindy McCain both lied to the American people at a news conference that I prepared for them on that same day. Both denied the story to me personally, as did the lobbyist at the center of the story. They also lied to the American people. You see, when I was 36 years old, I did not understand the difference between integrity and loyalty. Before I met John McCain, I would have answered that they were indistinguishable from one another. John McCain taught me a hard lesson about the differences between the two. When Senator John McCain called and asked for my help as his front-running presidential campaign was on a path to failure, I agreed and architected the strategy. He architected a strategy that resurrected his aspirations for success as a presidential contender. I left my young family behind for months at a time in service to the cause of John McCain. I do this because of my immense respect for his courage, honor, integrity. Oh, you mean like in the savings and loan scandal? Huh? Is courage, honor, integrity there? Or how about when John McCain was running for president in 2000 against George W. Bush and seriously made the accusation several times that George W. Bush intended to establish a theocracy in the United States? Yeah, that guy. Leave aside his marriages, leave aside his career as an aviator, which we could call perhaps checkered. Leave aside the persistent rumors that he aided and abetted the enemy North Vietnamese. For 14 years, I remained silent because I didn't want to do anything to compromise John McCain's honor he would be unable to say the same about mine. Okay, so, for the next several months, there was not a single night that passed that I did not spend hours on the phone with a broken, distraught, and profoundly unstable lobbyist. She screamed at me incoherently for hours every night. I became the shock absorber for her rage, anger, and humiliation. I did this to protect John McCain and the campaign. During my final call with the lobbyist, as she heard my young kids crying in the background, geez, that's like a Bob Ezrin move, you know. Let's have crying children on the record. She told me that she wished that they could die so that I could share the depths of pain she felt when John McCain called her a good friend during his news conference denying the relationship. 20 minutes later, John McCain called me panicked. He insisted that I apologize to her or else his campaign would be over. And that absolutely happened. I told John to, expletive deleted, and yet again, against my better judgment, I returned to the campaign trail. What does that say about you? That you're lacking courage and honor and integrity, Steve Schmidt? But by early July 2008, the campaign was in deep trouble. Nothing to do with him, of course. I was put in charge of everything except the VP search and vetting process, as well as the looming convention. Rick Davis retained authority of those years. That same month, in a condo in Aspen, Colorado, I spoke to Cindy McCain privately about the abhorrent and abusive behavior of her daughter, Megan. She grew teary-eyed and said, "I raised two good sons." Both John and Cindy McCain were mortified by her behavior. After Senator McCain was unable to choose Joe Lieberman under the one-term pledge that I had proposed due to Lindsey Graham's lack of restraint and discipline to maintain confidentiality, the campaign was left with two choices, Mitt Romney and Tim Pawlenty. Unfortunately, neither would change the fundamental dynamics of an election that we were losing, perhaps because John McCain was a lousy candidate and he was a unpleasant man with a violent temper. Not very likable. That was the context under which I made the call to Rick Davis, suggesting that we consider Sarah Palin. I said I didn't know much about her, except that she was the most popular governor in America, but that we must fully and completely vet her. What? Calling 911? Approximately at that time, the lobbyist had called John McCain's Senate Chief of Staff to say that she'd called him from the front seat of her parked and running automobile in her closed garage. She wanted to pass along the message that she wanted to say goodbye to John McCain and that she loved him. The Chief of Staff asked me if I'd done the right thing by calling 911. I assured him that he had. For 14 years, I've been accused of being disloyal for speaking out against Sarah Palin by the people who both failed to vet her and who know what transpired with the lobbyist. I was consumed with trying to figure out what to say and do when the consequences of John McCain's lying inevitably exploded in the public view. Despite these and so many other attacks on me personally, I remained silent. And okay, yeah, apparently John McCain decided to roll the dice. Ooh, this was the biggest mistake I have ever made, writes Steve Schmidt. When the campaign ended, Sarah Palin lashed out at Nicole Wallace and me. She and her staff smeared us as disloyal leakers. I don't see any denying of the fact that everyone who followed the election knows that both Nicole Wallace, now with MSNBC, and Steve Schmidt leaked against Sarah Palin remorselessly. Why? Because it turned out that Sarah Palin was more popular than John McCain, which doesn't matter because if they'd won, she would have been the vice president, and then she would have done the traditional vice presidential things of, breaking tie votes in the Senate and being sent to the funerals of lesser foreign statesmen. As the stories of Sarah Palin's grift and egregious behavior exploded into public view, I asked John McCain to call her and tell her to stop attacking us and blaming us for her failures. He wouldn't. Why? Because he said that if he did, she would attack him. The bravest man that I'd ever met turned out to be terrified of the creature that he had created. His refusal to be honest about his mistake of picking her. Oh, I spoke out against the Tea Party movement because I knew where it could lead. Oh, dark, dark places. John McCain asked me to stop, and I refused because I promised myself after the campaign that I would never tell a public lie again. John McCain was deeply upset about my participation in a 60 Minutes interview previewing publication of the book Game Change. I did everything that I could to make sure the details of John McCain's personal life were kept out of the book. I did this to protect the reputation of both John McCain and his family. I did the interview because I was being viciously and dishonestly attacked by Sarah Palin, and I was left undefended by John McCain. Turns out that Steve Schmidt was banned from John McCain's funeral. Oh, wait. John McCain exists in the world between myth and man. Oh, give it up. I knew the man and I loved him despite his staggering flaws. I've always believed that a great nation needs its myths and heroes. That is why I've been reluctant to respond to the relentless, mean-spirited, and unfounded attacks made against me over the past 14 years by Meghan McCain. Meghan McCain? I cannot allow for my family to be abused, see me abused and bullied by lies. The truth is the only remedy that I know to make Meghan's abuse stop. Who? Scary Meghan McCain. Scary. And then he talks about, well, at least he does on Twitter, of undergoing therapy. And about how the therapist said, this is one of the most incredible stories that I've ever heard. I would pay money to hear this because that's exactly what happened. Because, I mean, what contemporary American life has been more fabled and fantastic as Steve Schmidt? Too funny. Let's go back to the chat. Those poor McCains, says Dr. Dead Name. Bomb, Iran. Does everyone remember that one? Respectable commenting name says, you mean the 32-hour Twitter rant that one could easily believe was motivated by amphetamine abuse? I'm a creep. I'm a loser. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. This Radiohead, of course. And that was from Don Willis. I invite the Iberians to the show, Kevin, says Yo Mama. I don't know if they speak English. Happy May 9th Victory Day, says Gamion. Porn star turned disco star. That would be Andrea True. Says great story, says Don Willis. Okay. Someone's talking about Nick Cage. Not Nick Cage. Nick Cave, the Australian goth rocker. Oh, guess who's made a pilgrimage to see President Vladimir Zelensky? Well, Trudeau. He says Putin responsible for heinous war crimes. This is from Ashley Stewart of the CSIS News Network, aka Global News. Heinous war crimes. Yes. It is clear that Vladimir Putin is responsible for heinous war crimes. There must be accountability, Trudeau said during an impassioned speech. Canada will support Ukraine as you seek justice for your people that Russia is killing and brutalizing. And Canada, which is effectively bankrupt, announced that will provide an additional $50 million in military assistance to Ukraine, including 18 drone cameras, $15 million in high-resolution satellite imagery, and up to $1 million in small arms and ammunition. Yes, let's pour more money down a rat hole. Canada is, in effect, well, not actually in effect, is actually borrowing money to give it away to the Ukraine, which is, of course, the most corrupt country in the Western world. Trudeau also pledged funding for demining operations, as well as a $25 million grant to the World Food Program for food security in Ukraine and removal of all trade tariffs for Ukrainian imports coming into Canada the next year. He said Canada will also provide new funding for women's organizations, human rights defenders, and civil society groups, rent seekers, in other words. Listening to the statements made by cabinet ministers of my government, I'm thinking, are they cabinet ministers of the Canadian government or the Ukrainian government? This is from CBC News. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly on Monday accused the Russian ambassador to Canada of spreading misinformation and propaganda to the Canadian public, but said she has no plans to expel him from the country. Joly described the increasingly frosty relationship between Ottawa and Russian Ambassador Oleg Stepanov during an interview on CBC's Power and Politics. And so we see a picture here of Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who, of course, his grandfather was a notorious Nazi collaborator in the Ukraine, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, and Canada's ambassador to Ukraine, Larissa Galadze. Yep, women all the way down. Oh, extremely problematic, Melanie Joly says about what Russia is saying. Oh, the lies of Vladimir Putin. Oh, what lies? Could you be a little more specific? Huh? No, they're not going to be specific. They don't want to get into the specifics of this. And this is from Murray Wolfe at the Canadian Press. And Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says Russian troops planted mines in playgrounds. Oh, how unspeakably evil of them. Parks and in front of family homes in Irpin, a town she recently visited with the Prime Minister. I wonder if Melanie, I know, I'd be, willing to bet a large sum of money on this, that Melanie Joly has never heard the term Potemkin village. Oh, the Ukrainians say it, so it must be true. And if the Russians say it, it is by default false. This is the level of people we have running my country. And we want to get to humor here again from Global News. This is Amanda Connolly. Defense Minister Anita Anand said the world is growing darker. Speaking at a conference of defense experts organized by the Canadian Global Affairs Institute Tuesday, Anand emphasized the more chaotic state of the world, that Canada will need to take a more bold and aggressive look at its own continental defense. What does that even mean? There's one possible military threat to Canada, and that is the United States of America. As previously noted, Russia already has more frozen wasteland that it has use for. In this new world, Canada's geographic position no longer provides the same protection that it once did. And in this new world, the security environment facing Canada is less secure, less predictable, and more chaotic. Perhaps Canada will have a working military. Actually, Canada will have, a plan to defend itself. No, that would cost money. And so it's not going to happen. We're just going to get empty rhetoric. This is from Lexi Lonas at The Hill. Matilda Bogner, the head of the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, said there is credible information regarding the mistreatment of Russian prisoners by Ukrainian troops during the war. Quote, "We have received credible information of torture, ill treatment, and incommunicado detention by Ukrainian armed forces of prisoners of war belonging to the Russian armed forces and affiliated armed groups," unquote. The humane treatment is occurring among captured Ukrainian and Russian soldiers as they're being coerced to make statements, apologies, and confessions, and other forms of humiliation. Bogner said, quote, "This violates fundamental rules of international humanitarian law. Ukraine and Russia must promptly and effectively investigate all allegations of torture and ill treatment of prisoners of war. They must also effectively control and instruct their forces to stop any further violations from occurring." How about cooking and eating part of someone, a dead person, because you thought that he was a Russian, and then filming it and uploading it? These people are crazy. And this is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A Sky News interview with Russian First Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyansky, was cut short after mention was made of President Zelensky posting an image of a soldier wearing SS insignia. Zelensky posted his Victory Day statement along with a collection of images of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. However, after it was revealed that one of the Ukrainian soldiers was wearing a symbol of the Totenkopf division, or Death's Head division of the SS, the post was hastily deleted. This is from Maxim Suchkov, So, President Zelensky congratulates Ukraine on V-Day over Nazism, featuring a soldier who wears Totenkopf, a symbol of the elite Nazi division of Waffen-SS during World War II. After complaints, the press service replaced the photo, but the original was there for 30 minutes plus. During the interview, Polyansky made reference to the controversy, but was quickly cut off after bringing it up. Do you know what it is? It's an emblem of a German SS division in the Second World War. So we published on the Victory Day an emblem of a fighter of right sector with this emblem, saying that this is a symbol of the fight against Nazism as he sees it. The host of the show seemed eager to prevent Polyansky from elaborating any further. And there you have it, the famous freedom of speech in the West, Polyansky subsequently joked on Telegram. Now they think 100 times before inviting Russian diplomats on live broadcast, he concluded. And Paul Joseph Watson concludes, yes, they may be Nazis, but they're our Nazis. And let's go back to Tainter. I missed him on Friday. And let's talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire. This is the book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. The Roman Empire was in a crisis in which its survival was imperiled. The situation was rescued for a time by Aurelian, who in a brief reign, 270 to 275, pushed back the barbarians, reformed the coinage, and reattached the rebellious provinces. Yet he failed or did not have a sufficient time to enact the sweeping administrative and economic changes needed to ensure the empire's survival. He did, however, begin these by conscripting labor when needed for the walls of Rome, and by ordering that deserted lands be obligatory farmed under the direction of local city senates. The effect of the latter directive was to draft peasants and whole villages into enlarged agricultural labor forces, yet the situation began to unravel again after his death. It was Diocletian who, in a reign from 284 to his voluntary abdication in 305, quelled the barbarians, defeated usurpers, and at the same time initiated sweeping political and economic changes that transformed the nature of the empire and ensured its survival for a while longer. It is difficult always to determine the starting date of the changes that transformed the later empire. Some can be traced to Diocletian or Constantine or to their successors. Others probably originated in the dark times of the crisis from which so little documentation has emerged. For this reason, the discussion that follows will be temporally eclectic, chronologically consistent insofar as possible, but concerned more with the processes of change than with the dates of administrative actions. The empire that emerged under Diocletian and Constantine was administered by a government that was larger, more complex, more highly organized, and that commanded larger and more powerful military forces. It taxed its citizens more heavily, conscripted their labor, and regulated their lives and their occupations. It was a coercive, omnipresent, all-powerful organization that subdued individual interests and levied all resources toward one overarching goal, the survival of the state. The most pressing need was increased military manpower. It's been estimated that the Severan army prior to 235 AD was just over 300,000. During the next half century, it was increased, standing at 400,000 when Diocletian took office. The level was raised again by Diocletian and Constantine to between 500 and 600,000. By Diocletian's time, in other words, the size of the army may have doubled in 70 years. It was increased again by Constantine and stood at 650,000 by the end of the 4th century. The recruitment rate for a force of this size has been estimated at around 96,000 per year. Diocletian built networks of strategic roads and fortresses across the frontiers. Constantine drew back slightly from this strategy, reducing frontier garrisons and creating instead a central mobile striking force with a greatly increased proportion of cavalry. The army of the later empire was probably better officered, since most were professional soldiers rather than civilians with temporary commissions. A second major transformation was in the administration of the empire. A serious revolt in Egypt in 297 convinced Diocletian that more than one ruler was needed to deal with the multiple crises besetting the empire on so many fronts at once. His solution was the establishment of the Tetrarchy, the system whereby the eastern and western halves of the Roman world were ruled by separate emperors, each assisted by a subordinate with the title Caesar. Diocletian also greatly increased the number of provinces by subdividing existing provinces into many smaller ones, and thereby depriving provincial governors of the opportunity to rebel. He increased the size of the imperial administration, which now had to move with him as he traversed his domains. The size of the bureaucracy was greatly expanded, perhaps doubling by Diocletian's abdication. Moreover, this increased peripatetic administration was largely duplicated 4 times in each of the imperial courts, 2 emperors, 2 Caesars. The number of capital cities correspondingly increased, making permanent the temporary proliferation of capitals under the pretenders. I'll have more from Joseph Tainer's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. I want to read an essay here from the Substack of Frank Wright. It's called Consumerism versus Life. The choice is yours. In one generation, we have progressed from a state of aimless stability with a broad expectation that society would coast into more of the same to a vertiginous chaos of social decline. If we are honest, we no longer expect to see the standards of living rise in any meaningful way. Is it enough to hope that we can hold on to what we have? Is there any way to calculate the success of a society in a bureaucratic model? We are usually treated to quarterly forecasts of GDP, which have taken a backseat recently to soaring inflation. The interest rate is always of interest since so many of us, like our governments, live on debt. We pay the monthly interest on the credit cards and mortgages and hire purchase agreements we have. This is called servicing our debts, and is perhaps how our service economy is understood. In a place of rising aspirations, comfortable and unchallenged freedoms, stable communities, and a human scale society, we have only cheap consumer goods and services. They are soon not going to be as cheap as they were. There is little attempt to present the state of society beyond the numbers about money. The reasons for this are obvious to anyone who lives in it. In the cities and now elsewhere, our populations have become mere crowds, strangers to one another and to the place they inhabit. A general rootlessness drags beneath these currents of mutual strangers like an undertow, threatening to take your feet from beneath you and to transport you somewhere else, somewhere equally disconnected. The consumer mentality is not simply the feeling which accompanies a new pair of shoes. It is a means of training people to invest their desires and dreams in the buying of things. These passions drive consumption, which since the 1920s has been about the replacement of needs with wants. Frank Wright continues, this is an important shift because it means the consumer is the site of a deliberate change in the provision of goods and services. It is the consumer who has changed, or who has been changed, to see in their purchases the promise of something more than function. It is themselves they see, altered, improved, empowered, signaled as a success or as a pioneer, yet never satisfied. Selling products at scale is far more successful when they are attached to aspirational desires. A genuine aspiration vanishes from real life. They become more attractive as they vanish. An exotic treat instead of owning a house, an absorbing video game with a pleasing map instead of a stable community. Consumerism encourages a sense of power conferred on the individual as buyer. The customer is always right, of course, when they are buying. For a moment, at least, you can feel as if the spotlight has been chosen to hesitate on you. We have all felt that thrill, the smile from the cashier or the sales assistant, the tantalizing promise of the thing to be possessed. Yet the light goes out and the magic melts away. It becomes just another thing in time, and we go on to repeat the process in memory of that sanctifying glow. What purchasing can sometimes offer is attention, significance, the feeling that for a moment, at least, you matter. Wright continues, yet the more we consume, the less we matter to each other. In feeding an artificial appetite, it comes to displace the natural hunger for human society. The appeal of the transaction is that it is completed from a place of privilege unlikely to be challenged. It is flattering. Real-life relations are complicated by the existence of the demands and needs of the other, which are canceled in the glorious moment of retail therapy. The mentality, which indicates the consumer personality, is the transactional approach to fellow humans. In this view, other people are fungible. They are as replaceable as Lego men, and they have no real significance beyond their power to satisfy or hamper your desires. Against this is the relational view, where people understand one another from the point of view of shared experience derived from durable relations with family, friends, and community. The consumer is ideally isolated at home, only with their desires. It is becoming a trope to say that our societies are geared to addiction, but the evidence for this is so widespread that it is staggering to witness the enormous project of dependence engineering, which secures what we used to call brand loyalty. From actual drugs, legal and otherwise, we see a model emerge of misshapen desire yoked to a habit. Antidepressant use is normal, weed and pills are everywhere. There is an opiate epidemic. Aside from this, practically every area of consumption is somehow branded as therapy. The worst of these is therapy itself. There is a difference in the therapies afforded to those on fire and those whose lives are being consumed in a slow burn, but it is a difference only in the nature of the emergency. Therapy is an attempt to replace the human relationships which we need to sustain us in a life worth living. Parents are absent from the home, as are children, who are now largely cared for by strangers. Work consumes life, often on screen, and life afterwards is lived vicariously through distortions of reality known as entertainment. Therapy is simply another addiction. To deny it to the desperate seems cruel, but how cruel is it that an expensive stranger is required to heal the wounds of life? That therapy is seen as a positive model for consumer gratification is itself an indication of the sickness in society. Wellness, pampering, lifestyle sampling, the reach for a purchased service to fill the hole, online gambling, pornography, booze, food fetishism, sugar, starch, plastic. Frank Wright continues. Consumerism promises to fill a hole it has dug in the self, and it is a false promise. In replacing need with desire, it sought to create an endless market promising ever increasing sales, and the unlimited desires bred from gleaming advertisements can never be satisfied. It teaches us to think inside the box, which we cannot wait to open. Everything has become an accessory to the consumer self. Babies can be bought from surrogates who remain faceless when the happy, often homosexual male couple pose for their hospital photos. Holidays take place in formerly beautiful locations which are now under occupation from a transient flow of browsers. You can alter your own face, your body with surgery. The acme of consumerism and its fusion of money with desire is the transgender phenomenon. And Frank Wright concludes, this is the pinnacle of purchase power, which has always whispered the lie in your ear that through buying something you can escape yourself, to become a new person. A new identity confers escape, release. It sneers at God and man alike, saying, I alone have escaped. That radiant spotlight can be wrenched onto your every word, its presence summoning the dramatic behavior which so often accompanies this autoerotic alchemy of surgery and stage makeup and drugs. The reason it is taboo to fail to applaud this horror is that to do so is to deny the supreme mystery of the consumer cult, that you can truly buy who you want to be. This is the one only promise remaining in our dissolving culture, whose liberalism is entering a barbarizing endgame. There are no aspirations on offer outside the marketplace. The bizarre situation is that of a global system, dizzying in magnitude and waste, whose towering complexity is calibrated to the pinhead of the individual self. It is no wonder we have been crushed. And with that in mind, I bring you this sickening story from Politico. And yeah, let's hear from an economist about whether women should have babies or not. Let's hear from a bureaucrat. Banning abortion would be very damaging to U.S. economy. This is by Victoria Guida. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen Tuesday argued that banning abortion would be very damaging for the economy by reducing women's ability to balance their careers and their families. Quote, I believe that eliminating the right of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades, unquote, she said in response to a question at a Senate Banking Committee hearing. And of course, draft report, Roe v. Wade. In her comments, Yellen said that the 1973 ruling helped allow women to finish school and increase their earning potential, leading to higher participation in the workforce. Research also shows that it had a favorable impact on the well-being and earnings of children, she said. There are many research studies that have been done over the years looking at the economic impacts of access or lack thereof to abortion, and it makes clear that denying women access to abortion increases their odds of living in poverty or need for public assistance. Senator Tim Scott, later in the hearing, pressed her on her answer, arguing that framing the issue of abortion around labor force participation feels callous to me. It means that children will grow up in poverty and do worse themselves, Yellen responded. That is not harsh. That is the truth. I recall some years ago, Diane Francis, formerly editor of the Financial Post, wrote an op-ed in which said that women who raised their children at home and didn't go outside to work were in effect traitors to the GDP. And Janet Yellen has made it very clear that the GDP, or Moloch, as I will call it, demands the murder of unborn children. Because don't you want to see this woman in a cubicle? In a cubicle all day? Or maybe her in her nightmarish open plan office? I mean, we've all seen the pictures in the brochures and the internet and TV. Oh, it's always so light and airy, sort of a bluish light. Where you have these people who seem to all be in their 20s and 30s, and they're all really well dressed, and none of them are fat. And they're having some sort of meeting. And this is the dream, that women get a job, which is one of those, what is it you do here? Jobs, you know? And that is the highest function that a woman can serve, which is to bolster the GDP. Of course, if she has children and she doesn't look after them, there's all of the buying, the fast food buying, and all the rest of it, because it would be inefficient for a mother to actually make meals for her children. There are other people to do that. And, efficiencies of scale can be exploited, like the Happy Meals for the kiddies. And of course, the child might get 30 or 60 minutes of quality time. I don't really hear that phrase much anymore. But I don't know. It is sickening to me to see a cabinet officer of the United States of America make it explicit that the economy demands that mothers murder their children. What is the GDP anyway? We all worship the GDP. Oh my God, the GDP is not going up high enough. What does it mean? Can it be explained? I do know that it includes government outputs. So that is to say, the GDP can be swollen by borrowing money, which does not seem to me to be a particularly accurate or useful summation of the economy or of things that are of worth. And in a related story, this is from Ari Hoffman at the Post Millennial. Carolyn Riley, a reporting fellow for the Rewire News Group, has called for more arson attacks against anti-abortion groups. She also suggested an escalation to deadly political violence. Yes, anti-abortion group in Madison, Wisconsin, set on fire Sunday morning. Also in Oregon State, similar incident. If abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. They're really in it to win it. These radical abortionists. Others must die so that babies can die as well. The writer retweeted a New York Times article about an anti-abortion group's headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin. Strangely, she has removed her Twitter account, this woman. So let's just see how crazy they get about this. Oh, and an amusing story. The smuggest man on television, I think a truly hateful figure, Stephen Colbert, is in the news again. Remember the vax scene? The vax scene, the scene about vaccinations. Dancing hypodermic needles because everyone just loves the jab. How many times have you been jabbed? I've been jabbed more times than you have. Paul Joseph Watson and Summit News talk show host Stephen Colbert has caught COVID for the second time in the space of 3 weeks after previously thanking the efficacy of the vaccine when he contracted the virus last month. Yes, really. And he's grateful to be vaxxed and boosted. That's what he says. Yeah. Has he ever thought about this? Does he know what the word efficacious means? He's got it twice now in the space of 3 weeks. Again, this phrase negative efficacy comes to mind. And we have the figures to back that up. The more shots you have, the more likely you are to get COVID 19. Before I go, I want to say some words about episode 3 of series 3 of the HBO show Barry, which is called Ben Mendelsohn. Ben Mendelsohn is an Australian actor. And why do we hear this name? Well, because Sally Reed is doing press for her show called Joplin. It's her and her teenage daughter, and her daughter is about to fall into the cycle of abuse that Sally's character had, or Sally herself. And so there's, what do you have? Access Hollywood and E interviewing her. These are the quick hits, as they say in the business. Just these absolutely inane questions. And so who do you think should be the new Spider-Man? Sally says, Ben Mendelsohn. Was that the right thing to say? And then later, Sally is quite embarrassed because she thought that Cake Boss was one of the Avengers. A lot of meta there. Bill Hader, of course, this is his show along with Alec Berg, and Bill Hader was a gopher production assistant when he started out in the entertainment business, and I'm sure he has many, many stories. He says he was doing press for a film, and someone asked him, "What do you think of Ben Affleck as Batman?" In more meta stuff, we've heard of these terrible TV shows throughout the 3 seasons of Barry. There were the lead prosecutors. You've suffered sexism and you've suffered misogyny. And this is a district attorney talking to these 3 quite good-looking women, very well dressed, who appear to be in their 20s. And you're going to be my lead prosecutors. And one of the head agents at Gersh says, "How was this not picked up?" Previously, we saw, what was it, Payback? Oh, Payback Ladies. It's that time of the month. Time for revenge. And it was about a group of women, 3 women, again, young and attractive, who first murder their husbands or boyfriends and then give advice to other women who would like to murder their husbands or boyfriends. It was mentioned in episode 2, I think. Bill Hader's character Barry had been given a role in a show with the portentous and pretentious name of Laws of Humanity. And I could barely believe this when I saw it, that the lead character is called Humanity. "Call me Hugh," he says. Yes, Humanity. And we learned from previous episode that this isn't your regular law firm. It's not just about winning cases and winning judgments, for people who are suing in class action suits and the like. It's about getting rid of meanness in the world. Yes, and that phrase was actually used. He said Marika Dominchik was in the show, and she is in Chechnya, where Monroe Fuchs is. And he was furious at first because he's, in the mountains in the middle of nowhere, and there's not much in the way of amenities. There isn't his beloved Ohio State football, go Buckeyes. But it turns out that he likes tending goats. And he seems to be happy there, as this Marika Dominchik is a very attractive woman. And she seems to get along with Monroe Fuchs, who is not a very attractive man and is how would you say, a murderer, and perhaps worse. I talked about funny things in the show, and there are a lot of funny things in the show, but this show is quite dark, and this season is the darkest of all, because Barry has, he's kidnapped his acting teacher, Gene Cusino, in effect, saying that you're going to work with me, or I'm going to kill I'm going to kill your son and your grandchild. And hey, I'm making it up to you. Yes, I killed your girlfriend, but no, I'm going to get you back into the acting world. Actually, something that was very funny, that Barry had made a heartfelt speech near the end of episode 2, saying that, you should give Mr. Cousineau, he always refers to him as Mr. Cousineau, another chance, because he completely blotted his copybook by his behavior over the years as an actor. And, this is a man, I was out of the Marines. I had nothing in my life. I had no structure. I had nothing to live for. And, Mr. Cousineau gave it to me. He changed my life. And they were quite taken by this, the casting people. So they agreed to give him a small role in the same episode that Barry's in. And then they said, hey, we're going to give you a line. And a very funny scene when we meet the showrunner, and a director, a casting director. And the showrunner had been a production assistant back when Gene Cousineau used to appear regularly on TV shows. And yeah, do you remember me? You injured me on set. Blank. You threw hot tea on me because there were chives in your omelet. And Cousineau is sitting there blankly, and he says, I'm going to need more. That's a suggestion that he has physically attacked so many people on sets that I can't be expected to remember all of those cases. Come on. I've had a long career, and I really have to single out Henry Winkler for this season, in particular episode 3. We've seen his character, Cousineau. We've seen him angry, and we've seen him depressed, and we've seen him hopeless previously. Well, we now see him as all 3 at the same time. And I guess in episode 1 of season 3, we saw Barry, and he seemed to be completely drained of life. And now Gene Cousineau is drained of life as well. But, art imitating life. He was involved. His scene on this ridiculous show at Laws of Humanity, it gave him an opportunity to participate in a scene. There was a death, and it was a death due to negligence or, to corporate meanness. And so he takes the opportunity to let Barry know, well, physically, he attacks someone else again on stage, exactly what he thinks about him. At the end of the episode, we don't know whether this ruins it for Barry, because, they said, that this guy's a nutcase. And, well, he pleaded for him, and they gave him a role. Or, whether it's the end for Gene, or whether they might think this an example of, brilliant improvisation. Well, Barry is always in trouble for all these reasons. Like, he kills people for a living, or kills people when they're inconvenient, or kills people when he's in a blind rage. But the young woman who plays Sally Reed's teenage daughter does not like Barry, thinks that he is an exemplar of toxic masculinity because of the scene where he had yelled at her from this far away, demanding that she hire Gene for the show that she is the showrunner of. And we're getting clues here that this young actress is going to be looking to get Barry into trouble. Mark Paul Gosselaar of Saved by the Bell fame appeared in Barry, and it's always nice to see him. And I believe he played humanity. There was a novel, best-selling novel by Anthony Burgess called Earthly Powers, in which it's about lots of things, but there's a cult leader, a dangerous American cult leader, who calls himself God Man, because his name is Godfrey Man. Okay, it's pushing the boat out a little, but not as much as humanity. I think I'll talk about the latest episode of Better Call Saul tomorrow. And let's take a final look at the chat. Hello from Tarot Destroyer. Appendicitis has been reported as an adverse event after immunization with mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines based on trial data. Jean was a television actor, says Brian Frakes. Yes, indeed. Of course, we learned it's a running joke that he seems to have known all of these famous people in Hollywood, and they all ended up hating him and wanted nothing to do with him. Okay. Monday, the Sicilian national holiday, says Brian Frakes. Don Willis, thank you so well for your kind words. I appreciate it. Don Willis says the mysteries of the world, 1 Sting lyrics, 2 Triscuit flavors. Well, you know, Triscuit flavor. It's like, what was his name? Michael D. Williams? Was that his name? He was on The Wire. And then he played a professor on Community. And he's talking to his class and he says something like, what is it with Lego? That, when he was in prison for 20 years. He committed a murder and was in prison for 20 years. So, I come out of prison and remember Lego. Lego was just Lego. But now there's Star Wars Lego and Harry Potter Lego. And everyone in the class is staring at him blankly. And he says, you know what I'm talking about. And that's what I feel about Triscuit. But there's like 12, 15, 18 different flavors of Triscuit now. Tarot Destroyer says it's a psychotic logic of demons' command. Since all rights are birthrights, a baby girl only gets her abortion rights after her birth. The Aztecs sacrificed children to the rain god Tlaloc. Tears were seen as fortuitous omens of rainfall. Yes, terrible, terrible civilization. But of course, now who are we to judge? Really? Who are we to judge? Well, if we can't judge that, then we can't judge anything. This was in Prescott, that when the conquistadors, the toughest men on earth, discovered the Palace of the Skulls in Mexico City, they shivered in terror because they thought they were literally in hell. And for years, people mocked this description of Prescott. Oh, this is all made up. And then a few years ago, the Palace of the Skulls was unearthed. And this doesn't look, that's an awful lot of skulls, tens of thousands of them. But then, who are we to judge? Who are we to judge? And the Aztecs, pretty advanced civilization. Well, it was pretty advanced civilization, true. But no, it was a horrible one. That's it for today. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. As always, if you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.